Do we sometimes feel like David against Goliath? Or we think about the phrase, you can't fight City Hall? Or we feel, quote, outgunned or not empowered enough? Maybe not enough money, we say, or not enough allies. Or maybe we feel we're not good looking enough, or we don't have any degrees under our belt. So we feel we don't have power, we don't have credibility, and we don't even have money for marketing or ads in general. Then where does this concept of David versus Goliath even come in? Was David simply someone who had a lot of courage? You might say, if a Christian, well, his pebble was guided by the hand of God. But if we look in a more broad view, there might be Davids and Goliaths today, or David and Goliath situations in our lives that we don't want to address by saying, well, I just have God on my side. Can we draw any other analogies that would be useful? Well, I am reminded of some people I've run across in videos or book form. For instance, there's a book, Sell Like Crazy. And this person from Northern Australia originally talked of how important it was his growing up with a mother, working class, who was a single parent and instilled in him a strong work ethic. He said, one point in his book, nobody outworks me. Also, the famed basketball player Kobe Bryant was once noted before his helicopter wreck to have said that he works extremely hard, or words to that effect. Also, in a motivational speech by Arnold Schwarzenegger, the bodybuilder and politician and actor, he too has said he worked his you-know-what off. And that in general, if you want to get somewhere in life, you need to work your A off. Well, it seems to me then that maybe in competition between a David and Goliath, where one feels very outpowered, maybe one does have this under one's belt and isn't fully appreciating it. That compared to Goliath, we may be working our A's off, so to speak. We may be putting in 10 times the effort, the work. But here's the second point. What good is this if it is not very highly efficient work? In other words, if the work, as the author of Sell Like Crazy pointed out in his book, is too much on just fluff stuff, unimportant stuff, well then that's problematic. But I would say, moreover, what about work when one is down and out, bummed out, or what psychiatry says, depressed? What about lots of work too if one is chronically angry, or often highly fearful, or thus catastrophizing some or more things? What if one thus is highly obsessive compulsive? Again, psychiatry would say, or I again would say in my own parlance, a catastrophizer. What if one has chemically based addictions, or the addiction to status, control, or distractions as per expensive toys, adult toys, and entertainment, and whatnot, or overwork, or relationship addictions as distractions, even that subpart being sexaholism? Well, maybe that's far more the Goliath than a number of Davids, and it behooves us thus to understand where we fall on the comparison spectrum. I might also add that in a book on, quote, narcissistic abuse, I believe, It was pointed out a kingpin thing is that you know yourself. And Sun Tzu in The Art of War said, things are going to go much better for yourself. In fact, he might have said success is guaranteed, but I'd question it to that extent always. If you know your, quote, enemy and yourself. I'd say to step that up a notch, to jettison enemy from our vocabulary and say competitor. Brian Tracy, too, in a video, The 4 P's of Marketing, i.e. principles, talked of how crucial it is that we know our competitors, their strengths, weaknesses, etc., and where we stack up. What are our strengths? He called them unique selling propositions. And that if you've clarified this, you're going to find much more success. All of this, thus, knowing yourself, but with a caveat, I would say, know yourself on a hypothetical or hypothesis level, not on a I'm certain level, because then there's one thing you don't know, and that's that you're claiming to be omniscient, isn't it? So maybe an additional toolkit item for David would be to know you don't know it all, that everything is a hypothesis, even who you believe you to be, as per Socrates saying, know yourself, or know thyself, and Sun Tzu saying also, know your enemy. This all, thus, to degrees, in terms of forming hypotheses of who your, quote, enemy or competitor is, and yourself. The minute we start to fuss budget and say, I can't act until I'm certain of who my competitor or enemy is, and myself, I think we'll never act. So, there again, another component then to the David, perhaps, acting when not certain, or thus the concept of making decisions under degrees of uncertainty, only I've never seen anyone say that all decisions are under uncertainty, because nothing is ever certain. Nothing. There's no facts, thus. There's approximations of things more certain. And then these may be termed facts, for lack of a better word to use. But today's facts can be tomorrow's garbage, or false fads, or mass delusions, if you wanted to call it that. Today's facts. Even Freud, considered very factual, now on the trash heap in some people or more's circle. So much for facts. David would know there's no facts, but yet act accordingly at the proper time, the optimal time, to get results by feedback. Next, I think that David, as opposed to a Goliath, would tend to have more respect for human beings in general. He would have thus also, part and parcel of this, better words, more respect-based words concerning people. This would take, of course, a lot of work. Hence, in part, people saying you must work your A off. Well, part of that would be to develop more respect and the words that go with it, I'm sure. Yet another factor in the David-Goliath approach would be to outwork David and Goliath in terms of being able to handle complexity thus and master the details, quote, of the game. Analogously, a chess master has mastered huge numbers of details compared to the beginner. Hence, theoretically, the advantageous words pro or professional versus amateur. Not that we have agreement on how you become such on the top end. As per words, by the way, Evie Pamperis has written a fascinating book that I've been reading, Bulletproof. She was once a Secret Service agent for a president of the United States and wrote that book afterward, her gleanings, her experiences and insights. And she found it much easier to arrest people or deal with people who were your, quote, competitors, or call them enemies if you had to, by treating people with respect. And she detailed how she did this. I'm facetiously remembering too just now Columbo, how he tended to treat all people he dealt with on his shows with respect almost all the time, to the point where they, at the end of the show, almost like Evie Pamperis has outlined in her book as per her experiences, almost literally threw their hands out in front and said, "Please slap the handcuffs on me. I'm tired of all this." Upon which they stopped off at the local Dunkin' Donuts and had a cup of coffee and a few donuts, out of respect for the person and compassion for them and interest in them as human beings. Call this understanding, call it love, call it respect, whatever you want to call it. Evie Papandreou, or rather Pamperis, also said in a fascinating video, various words you should not use and concepts about words in general. And in another video yet, she said a great mark of a police person is that they never have to withdraw their weapon from their holster in, say, 20 years until they retire thus. That their weapon of choice ought to be and is more powerful, their words, but only if you have the proper words. I might also add, another weapon of choice that David may have more than Goliath is to be able to advocate for yourself. I have a book I bought a year ago and have been reading to this effect by a lawyer, the title of which is Advocate for Yourself. It seems to me that part and parcel of this is that many aspects of ourselves may be great but get misconstrued as not there because we have an aspect that gives some people a misconception of our true overall worth and package, so to speak, because of what they call first impressions gone awry, because many people are too busy and too much under the gun, too fearful to make but cursory judgments and put us in pigeonholes and cubicles based on certain key assessments. And so, advocating for yourself in my book, meaning to show your strengths which are not apparent on the surface, but inside, or that get misconstrued by an overwhelming counter impression that you call first impressions of prejudicial nature, or otherwise known as, stereotyping, such that advocating for yourself could show plus points about yourself galore if you know what they are, and you're accurate about these. It's not just wishful thinking such, and they're communicated when otherwise you may be stereotyped, so to speak, or prejudiced because of how you're perceived, again, often by people who are highly rushed and highly fearful. This is far less of an issue, I believe, in rural areas where outliers, so to speak, are perceived and be willing to be perceived much more easily. That including the people of, quote, good heart who are driving in what you might call jalopies with not much money to their name in general, or who do not have what you call beautiful physical appearance, or aren't youthful, or have wrinkles and are over 35, say, if female, on and on and on, or who don't live in a, quote, expensive house, and don't have a, quote, job or high-status job title, maybe aren't married either, or who have unconventional, as per some would say, sexual indulgences or options or pursuits. Advocating would mitigate and try to counter all these things, and a David would do this probably much better than a Goliath, or so I hope. I would also say a key component of growing is note-taking, followed by reviewing and iteratively improving the concepts. So, as part of figuring things out, Hence Marie Forleo's book, Everything is Figure-Outable, i.e. to a degree. You can't figure out how to beat death, for instance, and make it actually happen. I don't think anyone's done that yet anyway. I haven't gotten the email or news item on that. I might add that Piotr Wozniak in Poland created a software system called SuperMemo as an attempt to review much more efficiently than he ever could beforehand as studying for a PhD in computer science, using spaced repetition software and computer assistance to do it with. So not just is review important, but shall we say efficient review. Just like, as I may have been talking earlier, hard work, but well done, angry, or very fearful, is low efficiency work. Same goes for reviewing. Might I mention too, humor and smiling would be very useful as, quote, weapons or tools of choice as a David versus a Goliath. Hence, in Carnegie's book, Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, he pointed out a smile is crucial. And Boris Yeltsin, too, to rejuvenate his career and eventually become president in Russia, got a coach to help him, and amongst other things, he was taught how to smile, or to overcome the impediments that held him back from smiling, and thus part and parcel of being, quote, taught to smile. Otherwise, I would say he would have, at best, the capacity, as taught, to simply grimace or show a constant smile as a mask. I point out all of this just to refresh my own memory and put it in verbal ink, so to speak, maybe a book later, on what we need to do to work on ourselves as a David, so to speak, against a Goliath. And tangentially, when we talk of the power of the pen as a puny little stone, I would say, against so much in the world today, a Goliath, you might call it, or elephant, against a mouse. Maybe we need to constantly refresh our memories of what is optimal to have working against any competitor. And these items I've mentioned, I believe, are such, as I presently can best come up with. And often I would hypothesize a Goliath hasn't developed or isn't interested in developing. Maybe they don't even have the, quote, empathy level to develop. Or maybe they have too many addictions or too much anger and too much fear to develop on an efficient level. Or they sought cookie-cutter developmental solutions to their power sources, whereas David sought unconventional sources, out-of-the-box sources, off-the-street sources, school of hard knocks sources, call it what you will, out-of-industry sources even. I hope that would give us some hope then as to how best to deal with life's adversities when we feel ourselves a David against a Goliath. Might imagine that some of this is right up the alley of those who love the concept of developing more and more spirituality, and hopefully that kind of inkling even within cut and dry religious circles per se. And that's why David was, quote, in the Bible and not in a brick-and-mortar store per se of a non-spiritual nature. Well, that's my take anyway. Pluses and minuses, of course, of religion all set aside. Some thoughts to consider, perhaps.